Welcome into special edition of Inside Carolina podcast. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's not Don Callahan. This is normally the spot for the noon dish. And Don has the afternoon off now that we have some major breaking news from North Carolina. Earlier this morning, Mack Brown announced Gene Chizik out as defensive coordinator, Tim Cross out as defensive line coach, Ted Monachino elevated from analyst to defensive line coach with a national search for the defensive coordinator position that is now open to be conducted. Jason, I'll get you in here. I think what I've heard the most from folks in the short time since this news actually broke is long overdue. Your thoughts on what's happened this morning for North Carolina football?
Well, first of all, I do want to emphasize that it's not. I don't think it's a good thing to take joy in people getting fired, especially good men. And I do think Chizik and Cross are good men. And in that respect, I'm sad to not see it work out. Sorry, I'm sad to not see see it not work out. Because you want to see good men do well in the profession. You want to see people succeed. Nevertheless, I also think that this was, if anything, a year late. You'll remember last year before the season, what it was that I said if the UNC defensive line didn't tear things up before the 2022 season, I said if they don't tear things up in the in that season, given that they've got more experience and the talent is there, then changes needed to be made.
Absolutely, and
they made half changes.
Yeah,
right. And they tried to kind of band-aid it, and I understand why they did that, but ultimately they ended up making the change a year later that they probably should have made at that point. And even if we look at the timing of the Gene Chizik hire after Jay Bateman departed, there were some questions at the time of whether that was actually the right hire for what the program needed at this stage. And I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and I think they could have made a better hire at that time as well. So you could take this back 2 years to that kind of inflection point, and a lot of people kind of know that particular parting of Bateman leaving and being replaced with Chizik and that whole thing. And I think at this point you can make the case that the wrong changes were made 2 years ago. So really, the last couple years, the things on that side of the ball, the defensive coaching staff, things could have been stronger and things could have been better. And I think the results would have been better. So that's my initial reaction. And now the hope is that they can find a defensive coordinator that is going to do what the hope was when Chizik was hired a couple years ago. And I do think that's a tall order with where things are in the program.
It's interesting, and folks, if you haven't checked it out on Inside Carolina, the statements and all, and the release is out. Speaking to the good man portion of Jason's talk there, and I 100% agree. That's one thing that we often get caught up with in sports in general is dogging the people that are doing it, whether it's players, whether it's coaches especially. Granted, they do get paid a lot of money to do things, but Gene Chizik's one of the best football coaches I've shared the sideline with during my 46 years of coaching. Man of faith, worked tirelessly to provide best coaching and mentorship he could to the young men he coached. And then he goes on to say, we met following the season and wanted to thank Gene and his family for all they've done. But it's time to move forward, basically. And Chizik, of course, goes in and says that he and Mack will remain close friends. Jason, in the coaching profession, everybody knows everybody. You go all these coaching clinics and everything, and everybody knows of each other. But then there's certain relationships where guys are friends and they've worked together or they've been part of the same staffs. And Gene and Mack were like that. It's tough when those type deals don't work out. But do they ever really work out when everybody's friends and everybody wants it to be perfect and all? Or do you have to be able to step out of your box as a head coach, especially, and hire guys that are not, maybe not in your tree, in your coaching tree, but maybe can upset the apple cart a little bit and do something a little differently than maybe you would have. And I guess I'm getting to the point of Gene and Mack were close. How important is that in coaching? How important is it to not have that in coaching? Sort of a long-winded question, but it's to the point of Greg Barnes said this doesn't need to be going into the old friend well again for Mack to hire somebody. Just speak to that aspect of the coaching profession.
Oh, man, that long question has set me up for a notoriously long answer here. Get out that, you go ahead and get out that hourglass. Because there's a lot here. There's a lot of meat on that turkey to kind of debone. And the first thing I'll say is coaching is not like is unlike a lot of other jobs, because you are going to work with a small group of the same people every day, day in, day out, and you're doing it in a zero-sum situation where you win or they win, and people are keeping score, right? So there's good and bad about that. One thing though is, as a rule, you want to work with people that you actually can tolerate, that you can stomach working with, right? You want to work with people that you're friends with, because you're going, these guys are spending a lot of time together. I mean, you're on recruiting trips with these guys. You're essentially sharing hotel rooms. You are, sharing 3-4 guys in a car on a recruiting trip. All this stuff is, and you have to see eye to eye, right? You have to agree philosophically enough to be able to sell the same vision to the players and to sell that to coaches that you're recruiting their players and families and all of this. So in a lot of ways, it's a lot easier if you are coaching with guys that you're friends with. But then you also have the, sort of old rule of be careful about doing business with family, right? Be careful about doing business with your friends, because that can break up friendships and that can complicate business, right? Because what happens when Fredo happens to, get involved, and, now you have to, are you going to fire your brother, or is your brother going to potentially bring the wrong people in and, have them, endanger your own family in your house, right? You can't have that. So as with anything that's higher stakes and that involves a lot of time and people's lives, it's complicated. And I do think that hiring friends often does work. If those people are really competent, if they buy the same vision, if they're completely bought in, if they're really good at what they do, yeah, it works really well. Just like in any other situation. If your friend is an A+ player, you hire your friend. And if your friend is an A- player, and it's between that and hiring another A- guy, you probably hire your friend. Then, of course, there's the problem, though, of, you don't want to hire Fredo, right? And you also don't want to hire Grandpa, who's maybe been, he was a good businessman back in the 60s, but, maybe not quite on his game now. He can't quite he doesn't know what button push it, to push to turn on the computer and how this internet thing works. You need that at this point. So, having him on as an advisor is good. Having him on as a coordinator, in this environment, maybe not as good. And I'm not calling Gene Chizik Grandpa here. It's a mixed metaphor. But what you're trying to do, I mean, you think about this. You get guys that hire guys that they were teammates with before, right? I mean, Will Muschamp is at Georgia right now. You think that, there's no friends on the Georgia staff? Yeah, those guys, there are a bunch of guys that are friends that have come up together for years. Look at all the guys who hire within their circle. That can be really successful. the problem really comes in not with hiring friends. The problems come in with, first, you have to still hold your friends accountable, and that can be difficult. The hard part about being the authority, where you become the head coach and now you hire your friends who before, you kind of came up together. You were teammates before. You've always been on the same level, and now I'm the boss. That relationship does have to change, even if you are friends. And you still have to say, okay, look, I'm the boss. Here's how we're going to do this. And we have to handle that pecking order. Sometimes some friendships can handle that better than others. Some personalities can handle that better than others. So that's one thing. Another thing is, and this is where I think one of the biggest difficulties happens for head coaches, and it's why there's usually a life cycle for a head coach in terms of when he can be most successful and when it gets really hard to sustain success, is when you're a younger coach, you've got a bigger network of guys that you know from your various assistant coaching situations, from guys you played with, from, all sorts of things. And they're all at the position coach and coordinator level, just like you. And you know all those guys. And you know which guys are competent, which guys are, you've got your list of, like, if I ever get a job, I'm hiring this guy, and this guy, because they're really good at what they do. And, I respect them and I think they're really smart. And so when you put together that first staff, those are all A players, because you're putting together the best people you can. And then what happens? You have success. And what happens with teams that have success? Those coaches get hired elsewhere for upgrades. Those position coaches get hired to be coordinators elsewhere. And where do you replace those guys from? Well, ideally, you replace them from other guys that are in your network that you've met and that you've worked with in some way, shape, or form. But the older you get and the longer you've been a head coach, the smaller that network gets in terms of people that you actually know, that you've had experience with, that you've really had a chance to work with and see operate. And now you're operating off of recommendations from other people. And you can't necessarily just go to people within your network for those recommendations, because your network is thinning out as your people now. 5 guys that you coached with before are head coaches, and their network is your network. So now when you're hiring within your network, you're fighting for the best people. And maybe, within your network, you're now down to the B minus players that you can hire. That's when you have to go out and find other people and say, okay, look, I got to find another A player here. I got to find somebody who's competent, who can do this, who can be fresh eyes, who comes from a different tree, but still can buy the vision of how we're going to run our program. But anybody out there who's done any hiring in the past, who's been a boss somewhere, hiring's hard. Right? Finding personnel who actually are good at their job, who fit personality-wise, who will buy into the vision of the organization, and who are an actual A player. How often does that happen where you hire somebody like that into your company? And those people get hired away really quickly if they don't move up right away in your company. If they're not coordinator level type people right away, So that's where this gets difficult. And that's one of the reasons why, if you have a B plus guy or a B guy on your staff who's a long-term position coach, maybe you don't fire that guy. He's a B player, but am I going to be able to replace him with an A player who's not just going to be a coordinator next year? That gets really hard for coaches really quickly. And the older the coach, the more that becomes a factor. And the more successful the coach, the more that becomes a factor. And, not everybody can be Nick Saban, where, you have Saban's, you had the fired coaches association or whatever that Gruden, comically did. And then Saban decided to riff off of that, I guess, with the coaching rehab.
I was going to say Saban's rehab. Right?
Yeah. It's Nick Saban, his approach, because what happened is all of Saban's guys got hired. I mean, you look at the LSU staff from 2003, it's unbelievable. Yeah. You have Jimbo Fisher, Will Muschamp, you've got, I can't remember everybody else, but you got like 8 guys on that staff that wound up head coaches and successful head coaches. And you go like, oh my gosh. Well, that was great, but then he had to replace those guys. And ultimately, Saban's strategy, once he ran out of network, was to expand his network by saying, yeah, well, you know what? I'll just get guys who've, failed at another spot, but worked their way there, and then they can come here kind of tail between their legs, go through Saban rehab, and we'll still have some of the best and brightest who've not had their most success recently and give them a chance. That was his spot. That's where he carved out a new way to reinvent himself, to extend his window as a successful coach, as a successful dominant head coach. But only really one guy can do that at a time. And look what happened once Kirby Smart left and took half of Saban's network with him and took that to Georgia. Saban hasn't won a title in the 3 years for the first time at Alabama, right? Because Saban, now his network has been expanded. So that's a long answer to say this is complicated in terms of finding and hiring the best people. And it's not as simple as don't hire your friends. I think that's stupid. I think it's stupid to say don't hire your friends. You want to hire people who are going to become your friends on your staff. And you hope that those people are going to be so good that they can be successful and be your friends. And you hope that if they go somewhere else and they move up, that their network becomes part of your network so that their position coaches could become some of your coordinators and vice versa and all of that. That's what you're trying to do. And that's why coaching is not even though the results on the field are a zero-sum game, coaching is not a zero-sum game. You never want to burn bridges in this industry. You never want to, humiliate somebody else or get into feuds about this because you may need that person for a job at some point in the future. So very complicated in all of these relational aspects. But the one thing that's not complicated is results on the field, and that's ultimately why these decisions had to be made.
Yeah, and Carolina, of course, has won 8 and 9 ball games the last couple of years, but the defense has been borderline atrocious and a lot of question marks on the side of the ball. Let's say that. Now, let me ask you this, Jason. And of course, we're talking with Jason Staples here at Inside Carolina. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity, which are sponsors of this show. I need everybody to go check out those websites. I also need everybody to like this podcast on YouTube. Helps us out. Shout out to the 500 plus folks that have joined us here on the Noon Dish, a special edition, a preempted edition.
Speaking of getting help with HR type stuff, right, and hiring and all of that.
Really.
That's Congruity's thing, right?
Yeah, really. Congruity, they manage the payroll and the HR while you handle your business. So maybe they need to be hired in Chapel Hill. Let me ask you, Jason. Speaking of hiring, North Carolina announced Ted Monachino will be the new defensive line coach. We talked about that. Charlton Warren, specifically named in the release, is staying, but a national search for defensive coordinator. Now, we can get into the names and possibilities at some point, but my question to you is, how many defensive coordinators that you know, unless it's already done deal, like to come into a situation where they can't hire their guys? Because my thought here in this, when we were talking about Carolina over the last several weeks, is Mack needs to hire a defensive coordinator and get out of the room and let them do whatever's necessary. That's not going to be the case here. It hasn't been the case the first couple times this has happened with Carolina. So you've got a situation where defensive coordinators coming in, whoever that may be, with guys that'll work under him already on staff. I think I know your thoughts on that, but what are they?
Yeah, you do know my thoughts because we've talked about this plenty off air, and I was pretty adamant that if I were a defensive coordinator, I'd want to come in and have a strong say on who stays and who doesn't on the staff. So if you're a head coach, you have to have people who buy into the vision for the program that you're setting. And that's from the strength coach to the coordinators to from the coordinators through the position coaches. But basically the head coach is going to manage the strength coach and the coordinators, and then they are going to deliver that message and delegate down the chain and work towards getting that larger vision of the program put forward. The defensive coordinator has to have synergy in that room to run the vision on the defensive side of the ball. And that was a big problem. You know this, I know this. At this point, it's no secret that when Jay Bateman was in Chapel Hill, one of the big problems they had on defense was that defensive meeting room, that defensive coaching staff was not all on one page. You had multiple. That's right. You had Bateman was wanting to do his specific thing, and you had multiple defensive coaches, position coaches, who were doing their own thing, who really didn't respect what Bateman wanted to do. They disagreed kind of with the approach and kind of his particular vision, and they just coached their own way. They did their own thing, and then that led to players not being fully bought in either. And that results in a chaotic situation where you just don't have a clear building. You've got, fractured things going on, and that was seen on the field. So, and this is one of those things. If I were being hired to be the defensive coordinator at North Carolina, if I was potentially offered this position, if I was interviewed, I know how this industry works. I know how these guys talk. You know what I'd do? First thing I'd do after I hung up and found out that maybe my agent let me know that I was a candidate, that I might be somebody that Carolina would want to hire, I'd pick up the phone and I'd call Jay Bateman.
That'd be an interesting conversation.
And I'd say, okay, Jay, you were there. What do I need to know? Should I take this job? Or is this career suicide? Is this going to set me back 5 years? Or is this going to put me in position to potentially be a head coach? Because if I'm taking the defensive coordinator position at North Carolina, I'm doing that with the hope that could potentially put me in position to be a head coach down the line. Right? This is not a position that you take just to be a lifer defensive coordinator. If you're a really good defensive coordinator, you take that with the hope that you can move up. And if you take it and then you flame out and you fail, that can put you years behind. Right? I mean, Jay has had to restart, right? He didn't do as well at Carolina as the hope, wound up having to be a position coach. Now he's going to be a defensive coordinator again. And if he does really well as a defensive coordinator at Texas A&M, he's going to be in position to be a head coach. But I'm calling Jay and I'm saying, hey, what do I need to know? Where are the mines on this field that I need to be aware not to step on? What do I need to know going into this? And should I take this job? And I'm pretty sure I know what Jay Bateman would tell me. He'd tell me you need to have veto power on the staff on the defensive side, and I think he'd want one or two changes made. So, in fact, I know there's one change that he would want made. I know for a fact that there's one change that he would want made. But not every coach is going to do that. But I think a lot of them will, and I think other coaches might call Gene and do the same. I would want to talk to Jay. I'd want to talk to Gene, honestly. And then I'd want to know that. And I'd negotiate that in. I'd say, okay, look, I'm willing to come in and initially get a feel for who's on staff right now. But at the end of spring, if I need to make a change, I need to be able to make a change.
It's an interesting thought. And we're talking with Jason Staples on Inside Carolina's special live reaction to the news. Gene Chizik, Tim Cross out, Ted Monachino in. National search for defensive coordinator is ongoing. Jason, let me ask you this. As far as the defensive line side, I think last spring or whenever Monachino was actually hired as an analyst, we thought that was a great thing. And
yeah, he's a good coach.
Yeah, and I've said this over the course of the year, whether it be on this show or elsewhere, is just install him as defensive line coach, and maybe you cure a lot of those things. Sort of speak to that dynamic. Monachino coming in, being an analyst, now is going to be the defensive line coach. You've been pretty vocal about the defensive line over the past, it's been longer than 2 years, over the past 4 or 5 years.
It's been 5 years at least.
I think the word accountability comes to mind the most with these discussions we've had about this football program in the last 5 years, and it goes beyond that, to be frank. But accountability, and you get what you allow. how does hiring a guy like Ted Monachino, who has coached some of the best in the NFL, and now he's on your staff at North Carolina. Last time he was in college, I believe 2005, so that'll be an interesting dynamic with him and recruiting. But how does this sort of improve North Carolina's standing on the defensive line to you? And look, I've got somebody else coming in the chat, and he's going to come in and listen to you answer this, and then I'll get his opinions. El Jefe is joining the room.
Ooh, I want to hear what he says.
Yeah,
So
talk about Monachino, Jason.
There's a little bit of a TBD here with Monachino in terms of him on this staff. I think the results of his career suggest that he's able to produce some quality pass rush, if nothing else. The concern that I have is that until some of the accountability from up above the defensive line coach position is addressed and made, improved, that we're not going to see as much improvement as what we would hope in that regard. But I do think Monachino's emphasis on when I was at the spring coaching clinic, he talked a lot about this and talked about the as an analyst, how when he was a position coach, his real emphasis was on being aggressive into the body of the offensive line and making sure that you're not just catching blocks, and really trying to reestablish the line of scrimmage on the other side of the line of scrimmage, all of that. Well, I mean, for those of you listening to this, that's probably red meat, right? I mean, that's red meat thrown to the tigers there. I mean, that's exactly what everybody wants to hear. And I did think some of the drills that were clearly brought in by him during the spring and fall camp were good. So those are all things that I would expect, hopefully, to continue to improve in that respect. But again, I want to see. I think certain larger picture practice things and all of that are going to need to improve beyond just the defensive line position, to continue to get the mentality to change defense wide, starting up front. And that's going to have to come from the coordinator, and that's going to have to come from Mack Brown himself.
Oh, yes, the culture question coming in there on the defensive side of the ball. And like I said, before I ask you that question or finish that question, Buck Sanders has joined us. Buck, I love your comment in chat. Just when you thought you were out. There is no getting away from us.
It's like the fourth Godfather reference in this in this show so far.
There's no
on the bingo card.
Yeah, get it on the bingo card. Pull that microphone up close to your face and spit some knowledge for this crowd. We've been around a long time, Buck. A lot of people think it doesn't matter until you change the top, but your thoughts here on the changes that have been announced today, and also shout out to the 600 plus. Buck joins it, and it immediately jumps 50 people. So shout out to Buck's friends and family that joined us as well. Get in here, Sanders.
Thank you, Tommy, for that encouraging comment there. My bat signal wasn't working quite as good as Jason's was, or I'd have been in earlier. I don't see so far anything that should surprise or shock anybody, right? I think probably the last person to be in on the idea that Chizik and Cross were gone was maybe Mack Brown. So once he got the memo, it just went from there. Monachino, I think is a good fit there. He already knows the players. He's already been around the players. He's got a way big head start on the far spring practice goes. A lot of times when you hire new coaches, they spend a good amount of their time just learning the players' names, and he's already got that down, so he can hit the ground running. Of course, the two things that I was able to catch that I agree with is you would like to see a DC brought in and let him pick his own staff, right? And that's not going to happen here. We'll have to see how that plays out. Um, but the bottom line is going to be Montalcino or Chizik or Cross or Warren or whoever else. The defensive coordinator is going to be the one that makes the calls on the field, and he's going to be the one who um, the personality is going to the personality of that coach is who the defense is going to mirror. Um, the head coach is often said, the team adopts the personality of the head coach. Well, in the case of Mack Brown, he doesn't really mandate what goes on in terms of scheme. He just picks a guy out he wants to run the kind of scheme he wants to have run, and then they're left to run the ball from there. So the big piece of this is going to be who's going to be the defensive coordinator, and what style they have of defense. And there's a lot of them out there now. So I guess I brought the bots back with me. And,
Yes, I was gonna say, the North Carolina General Assembly bans porn sites, so the bots have come back to Inside Carolina to protest during our live YouTube channel. I handled them for now, though. But
Right.
your thoughts, when you talk about style of defense and all that, um, I've seen a lot of people. Everybody's been talking. They want Chizik gone. They want Cross gone. They want Chizik gone. They want Cross gone. And now that they're gone, they're saying, "Well, what's that going to do? What's that going to change?" So I ask you, I ask you. I mean, what does this change? It certainly signals to me that shortcomings were acknowledged when there have been plenty of times where it sort of felt like shortcomings weren't being acknowledged. They were known, but they weren't being acknowledged. Um, as far as your mindset watching this program, I saw Bud Elliott had a tweet, which was an interesting tweet. I can't find it right at the moment. It said non-serious program. But your thoughts here on the fact that this has actually been done as far as the program moving forward, rekindling some of the excitement that was lost over the last month. Your thoughts in that regard?
Well, the whole idea we knew coming in who Gene Chizik was, right? I mean, he didn't come in as a blank slate. We knew what kind of defense he liked to run. There was no secret about it. He's a bend don't break kind of guy who doesn't like to get too aggressive. He wants to keep the ball in front of him. Um, that type of defense, we saw it in 2015. We saw it in 2016, and we had no reason to suspect he would do anything differently. Um, the thing that has surprised me is that in this day and age, that defense is just a dinosaur that is just not going to get the job done. It doesn't matter who's running it. If you're going to play that sort of um, laid back type of defense that plays that style of attack, then get ready to give up 400 yards a game plus. Get ready to be on the field a long time. Be prepared that your guys are going to get lots of snaps and be very worn out at the end of the season or in the middle of it. Um, so those kinds of things we knew, and but the extent of how dated that system is, and the inability for it to work even when everything was going the way you would want for it to go in that defense. Um, it would be interesting to see if the next guy comes in with an established MO and what that MO is. Because if we get the same MO, then I agree with the guys that you're talking to. Um, that, or the people you're talking about, as far as, well, what does that change? That doesn't mean anything. Um, that's not going to change a thing. We're going to have to look at who is coming in and what is their style of defense, and what is the prognosis for that style of defense heading into 2024, which is the age we live in, not 1994. So that's where I'd leave.
I want to before you even say anything else, Tommy. I know you wanted to ask a question based on that, but one thing I want to highlight, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I did see something the other day that goes to exactly what you're talking about here, Buck, and that is was looking at the off-target rates of quarterbacks in terms of throwing from like 2 decades ago versus now, and one of the reasons that you could take the approach 2 decades ago of, well, the offense is just going to make a mistake, is quarterbacks would miss a lot more throws. The off-target rate was like 10% higher for quarterbacks 10 years ago than, or 20 years ago than it is now. Quarterbacks just don't miss as many throws on that stuff. If you give them easy stuff, if you play soft, then they're just going to take the free stuff and they don't miss as much as they used to. And part of that's because you're not allowed to hit them as much. But
a lot of it is the 7-on-7s, right? The development of 7-on-7 football, and you got guys throwing the football in the summertime like 100 times a day, and 20 years ago, as Jason was referencing, if you saw a completion percentage average of over 55%, you went, that's pretty good. Today, if you're not hitting over 65%, you may not see the field, because the way the offenses are designed, and plus I think the education and tutorials and instruction that quarterbacks are getting during the summer, and wide receivers, anybody that catches the ball, they spend all summer throwing the ball and catching the ball. And when
yeah,
they get to college, they're already way ahead of guys that came in 10, 20 years ago. So
yeah. I mean, and just I'm looking right now at the numbers in terms of accuracy rate on the season. So this is excluding spiked balls, excluding balls thrown away. Is the ball on target? Right? So you're excluding drops, excluding balls thrown away, excluding spikes. Does the quarterback put the ball on target so that it should be caught? Bo Nix this year, 92.8% accuracy rate. I mean, that's free throws. Now, his off target, or his average yards per attempt was 6.7, which is, really low. He was throwing a lot of balls around the line of scrimmage. But Shadir Sanders, 92.1%. Carson Beck, 91.6%. Right? I mean, getting into the ACC, Cade Klubnik, 90.8%. Jack Plummer, 90.5%. So if you're giving these guys, opportunities to make unharried throws to, on the short side and these sorts of things, they're just going to keep hitting it. It's the running game now. And teams that are playing with more wide receivers on the field, that makes it difficult. And that's why you're seeing, schemes like what you're seeing from Tony Gibson at North Carolina State, or what you're seeing from Heacock at Iowa State, and different places like that, trying to seize back the initiative, because you cannot let the offense dictate to you in this day and age. You have to take the chalk back and dictate to the offense, and that's going to mean giving up a play once in a while, but you can't just expect that they're going to make mistakes.
And it's changed quickly, right? I mean,
yeah.
In 2015, that type of defense worked to some extent. Now, once it got to a certain level of football, it didn't work quite as well, but it was good enough to win 11 regular season games, no matter how you look at the schedule. And so, just from 2015 to basically 10 years later, we have seen such a dramatic change in. If you're waiting for that offense to beat yourself, you could be waiting for a long time. because the guys now have that ability, as Jason's talking about, to put the ball where it needs to go and in space. And so just sitting back and waiting for the offense to make a mistake is just a concept that outgrew it. Its usefulness. So that's going to depend on the defensive coordinator. Is the bottom line. I mean, what is his style of play, and can we identify it? We'll see.
You're muted, Tommy. Still muted.
He's still muted.
Maybe something went wrong in the
There he goes.
headset. No?
Nope.
I don't hear you. Ooh, boy, look at this.
Uh-oh.
Did something come disconnected, maybe?
This would be the Jason Staples show if I hadn't shown up, Tommy.
I did. Look, am I back?
Oh, there we go. There you go.
God dang, boy! I
But
leaned on.
now it's really hot.
I leaned on the thing.
There we go.
This has been a day. And first of all, I'm trying to get my exercise this morning. And I get a text and say I need to get on the podcast. Come on, Mack. We need an off season. Let me talk about Johnny T-shirt.
So are you now old enough now that you're retired from your other job? Are you now old enough where you get exercise instead of working out?
Yeah, I get exercise. I'll go walk around the neighborhood, speak to all the old people walking their dogs and stuff, and then realize I'm one of them. Let me talk about Johnny T-shirt and JohnnyT-shirt.com, sponsors of this podcast and great friends. And we got a lot of Johnny T-shirt gear for Christmas, and hopefully we at Inside Carolina are supporting them as much as possible. We saw this week that Linda's, a fixture on Franklin Street, is closing because of crazy rent and lack of business, I guess. But Johnny T-shirt will not be that business, because of the Inside Carolina fan base supporting them. They support us, get 10% off. Also, Congruity HR, Jason mentioned earlier. How convenient and relevant is it that we have a sponsor that handles HR? Given that we're talking about firings and hirings at North Carolina, CongruityHR.com /Tar Heels. Get your free assessment for your small or mid-sized business, customer service, technology, all that good stuff. All right. Final thoughts here. It is 681 people. My goal is to get past 700 on the noon hour, and I'm going to do it by asking the question. I'll let Jason go first, and then, Buck, you can close us out. Jason, obviously the old style doesn't work anymore, and it was proven well. You talked about that 2 years ago. I guess 2 years ago, probably right here on this show. What does North Carolina need from a defensive coordinator? We can talk about names or whatever, but just the style of play. Greg Barnes mentioned young and aggressive. I can be old and aggressive, but what does Carolina need as far as style that they need to bring in to get this team? And add this in, can the personnel that's on the field or in the locker room make that shift to be more aggressive after they haven't been the last couple of years?
Well, they could have 2 years ago. The personnel was on the roster at that point. I'm less sure that the personnel is on the roster at this point to be able to make that shift as easily. The good thing is that I think there's some cornerback talent on the roster still, as long as Huzzy's still on the roster, and you've got Caleb Koss showed some promise at the slot corner. So there are some players. But yeah, I've got concerns there. The biggest thing to me is they need to hire somebody who can change who changes the room when he walks in, and immediately gets the buy-in from these players to change the mentality on that defensive side, and someone with the gravitas to be able to say to Mack Brown, where Mack likes to delegate here, right? Mack doesn't want to have to be involved on the defensive side this way. Somebody who has the gravitas to say to Mack Brown, I got this, let me handle my side of the ball, and who walks who can walk into the defensive meeting room that first day and have those guys understanding that the way that they've played up to now is not acceptable and that they're going to have to play a more physical brand of defense than has been seen in Chapel Hill in a long, long time. It's going to have to be somebody who can walk in with the assistants and carry enough gravitas to say, you're going to do it my way. I'm going to look at everything you're doing. I'm going to evaluate every single thing we're doing as a staff, and you're going to do it my way, and we're going to be physical, and we're going to be we're going to be a defense that dictates and a defense that puts pressure on teams. And if you can't find that, then we're going to be rinse and repeat, and the next time it's not going to be the defensive coordinator, it's going to be the head coach that's going to step down, because this change needs to work. Mack Brown needs this one to be at least a stand-up double, if not a triple of a hire. And so he's going to have to get somebody who walks in and can carry that respect, has that gravitas, and is going to demand and be able to get the transition and physicality that he needs to get from that defense.
I think your point about accountability and demanding that, and then having the backing to enforce that, is tremendous here, because you see players tweeting, how they feel about the changes and all that stuff. That's what I'm talking about. They need to
I
have
haven't seen any of those tweets yet, but Lord knows what the players are thinking.
Was one of your favorites. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, of course.
But Buck, close us out here. You've got a situation where Carolina, to Jason's point, Mack's got a hit here. So how do we hit, Buck? How do we, as Inside Carolina, how do we hit it talking about this next offensive or defensive coordinator as a home run hire? What does Mack have to do to ensure that we're talking about that?
Well, the resume has to be there, right? I mean, that's given. You have to bring in somebody with a resume that has, some indication that he can succeed at this level. And I think part of it that we worry about should not be a problem. And what I'm talking about there is buy-in. Now, maybe the defensive players at North Carolina the last 3 years have looked at their results on the season and said to themselves, oh, we're damn good. We're fine. We're doing everything right. We don't understand why people are picking on us. If you've got people like that in your room, then they need to get weeded out. If they can't tell that what they have been doing has not been working, then they don't need to be on the field. They need to be able to recognize, and they should have no problem recognize, look, here's the stats. Over the last 3 years, they have not been pretty. It's nothing that anyone should be proud of from on the defensive stat sheet. There's been improvements here and there, but no. I mean, you look at what Mike Elko did at Duke. He gets hired, he comes in, immediately the defense is better. Immediately the whole team is better.
That whole team got more physical when he arrived.
Right. So, I mean, this is not like, oh, I need 3-4 years to, get this. College football can't wait 3 and 4 years anymore for somebody to come around and put their program in place. That they need to get results, and they need to get them right away. And so there needs to be something on that resume when the defensive coordinator is hired that even a dummy like me can look at and say, yeah, this guy's got a chance. He's got a chance. I see that he's done things that, have succeeded in the past. When Phil Longo got hired as offensive coordinator, I really didn't know him from Adam's house cat. I mean, he was, in FCS up until like 2 years before North Carolina hired him. So what did I do? I went to YouTube and I started looking. And I looked and I looked, and there was stuff there, and there was more to look, and you could see and you could tell what sort of offense it was going to be. And I said, okay, this could work. And it's got to be that kind of feeling that I think if what we're trying to, if what North Carolina's trying to do, what Mack Brown's trying to do, is to drag us all back in, then that name has to give us that same sort of feeling, that same sort of confidence that they can get the job done on that side of the ball. We'll see. I mean,
I mean, honestly, it needs to be. I mean, my initial thought is it needs to be the kind of hire that you could imagine being a head coach in 2-3 years.
There you go. Yeah, I agree. So I think that may be the end of the coaching changes, at least the way the announcement went down. I mean, he went to the trouble of just making it clear who was staying. You know, Warren was staying, and you know, and I guess he did that because Warren and Chizik sort of joined at the hip there for in several locations. But you know, it's encouraging. We thought that this was going to be the outcome that and you had to do it. I mean, I don't know how you could have gone into 2024 with Chizik as a defensive coordinator and Cross as a defensive line coach, and sell that to the fan base, particularly not this fan base. So you know, we'll just have to see about this next hire, and does that big piece fit in with all the other pieces around him? I think Monachino's a solid hire, and we'll just see where this DC hire goes from here.
Indeed, indeed. Inside Carolina will be all over it. Stay tuned there. If you're a premium subscriber, make sure you're signed up for your text messages. Everybody got a text saying what was going on today. It's normally a recruiting thing, but it's also a breaking news thing. So sign up for your text alerts if you're a premium subscriber. If you're not, go get a premium subscription. Inside Carolina, use some of that Christmas money. Buck Sanders, Jason Staples, myself will be here. We'll be back, I'm sure, with another emergency podcast to announce, to discuss a defensive coordinator hire. Could be quick, could be a while. We'll see what happens, but I tell you what, Inside Carolina, led by the president, Buck Sanders, will be all over it. And, of course, Johnny T-shirt and congruity as well. Jason, Buck, as always, appreciate it, my friends.
Later.